Sometimes we find ourselves asking questions like, what in the world has God up to? What is he doing? What is his purpose even? Like, I can't wrap my brain around what God is accomplishing and why he's trying to do it this way. And I think a lot of times when we find ourselves pondering these things and asking these questions, we tend to be looking at events that are significant to us, maybe, but that are but snapshots and moments in time, remembering that the Lord and his work is strung out over centuries and millennia. Not that the small, minute, or even significant events of each of our individual lives escapes the Lord, or that he doesn't care about them, but there is a bigger picture at work in what he is doing. When we come to this text in 2 Samuel 19, 20, 21, it seems like a lot of odd events that are kind of disjointed and disconnected. And so what I want us to do is kind of pull away and look at them broadly from what the Lord is doing big picture while these things are going on, and then it will help us to see how those parts and pieces are playing out in that bigger picture role. It's like there was this game that happened about a week ago today. If you don't know anything about it, it's all right. You don't have to know anything about football or the Super Bowl to get this. There was a play that happened towards the end of that game, and as a result of the play, there was a penalty called by some refs that were officiating this game. There's been a lot of discussion about that penalty called in that moment, about whether the refs decided the game, or whether it should have been called or should have not been called, or was it the right call or was it the wrong call. Before I say what this has to do with the Bible, let me just say it was the right call, and here's why. Not because of the result or the outcome, but because the refs understood what their job was. They see a penalty, they call a penalty. It's that simple. And that's what they did during the game. Now, are there some things that they didn't see and didn't call? Maybe. The refs, in their imperfection, might miss some things. Here's what I also know. There were some things that they didn't call that they didn't get right. That also happens. But for us to think that the outcome of the big picture was decided in one moment is wrong. There were two teams playing on the field. There was a lot of plays that happened in 3 other quarters to get to the fourth quarter. There was a lot of other things that had to fall in place, and to say that one thing decided the whole is to miss the big picture. And even from the point that that call was made, there were still 2 teams playing. The refs didn't know what was going to happen after that. There could have been a fumble. There could have been an interception. There could have been any number of things that would have changed the outcome of that game. So to focus in on one small thing and to say that the big part was decided by the one small is to lose sight. And the same is true in this text, and the same is true in life for us. When we look at our lives and specific events and to say, even with significant things. That the outcome of the large has been decided by the small is not true. Has the outcome of the large, let's say it this way, has the small thing had an effect? Yes, and in many instances, profound effect. And such is true in the text that we're in. But we have to keep in our lives in this text, we have to keep the big in mind and see what the Lord is doing and be reminded of what the Lord is doing. Because if we don't, we're going to get lost along the way. Life and the events of our lives do stack up like ripples in a pond. And you may find yourself on one side and the other. Okay? But something that happened on this side ripples and causes an effect over here that you see. But that event was far away. It traveled across the big picture. And so the small and the big are important. So when we get to 2 Samuel 19, keep in mind, there's a lot that has gone on. You had a nation ask for a king that already had a king. The Lord was their king. They said, we want a king that has flesh and blood like us. And the Lord said, it won't be helpful, but I'll give it to you. That king is established. The first one's terrible. The second one, pretty faithful. Does some really poor things. There's consequences for his choices that play out in the nation. This is David. Makes some bad choices. Part of that leads to his son rebelling and trying to overthrow him, which is what we've covered the last couple of weeks. Absalom. Absalom leads this rebellion, tries to overthrow David as king. David goes into exile. Absalom is killed, and David returns. And that's where we enter in chapter 19. In the wake of Absalom's death, David is found mourning over his son, which we hear and we go, yeah, why wouldn't he mourn over his son that was killed? Like, this is natural. This is how life progresses. Yes, but also, his son sought to kill him and remove him from his rightful place as king of Israel. So, there's a mixed bag in this deal. David is found mourning and weeping over his son in the first part of chapter 19, and some people that had gone and fought on David's behalf and risked their lives on David's behalf, fighting for the king and fighting for the land, the people, came to David and said, time out. Listen, I get you're mourning for your son, but you're losing sight of the big picture. There's been a victory that's been won. And even though you lost a son, you're treating everybody that fought on your behalf and that won this victory like you hate us and like we don't matter at all. David, you've got tunnel vision, and you can't see the big picture from the small event. And David hears that, and he corrects some course. Not that he says, oh, you're right, I shouldn't care about losing my son. But he says, you're right, there's still some things to do, and there's still work, there are still events at play, and we've got to get back to work. So he mourns and then gets back to work, and he travels and goes back to Jerusalem. He had gone into exiles, coming back to Jerusalem. Along the way, he encounters a couple of guys who were his enemies, basically. When he went into exile, when Absalom tried to rise up, these two guys didn't necessarily stick by King David, and so on his way back, they come to him and they basically said, listen, David, both of them, this is Shimei and, Ziba, yeah. Well, it was actually Mephibosheth, but Ziba is part of it. Shimei and Mephibosheth both say, listen, we didn't speak right by you. We didn't do right by you. We deserve to die at your hand because we betrayed the king. And David said, listen, nobody's going to die today. I'm not putting anybody to death. There's been enough turmoil. There's been enough killing. Yes, you guys messed up. But I'm willing to extend some grace. This is one place that David is reflecting the character and nature of God. They didn't deserve grace from David, but this is why grace is grace. Because grace is never deserved. It is given when it's not deserved. That's grace. Because if it was deserved, it wouldn't be grace. So, David pardons them. In the midst of all of this, you have these two sides that are feuding. Okay? As David returns, Israel's like, hey, welcome back, king. David's like, hey, guess what, Israel? You stabbed me in the back. Israel, for the most part, are the ones that went off and followed Absalom as he rebelled. Absalom had kind of won them over. David was chased out of town. Judah, which was a tribe of Israel, part of Israel, is the one that kind of stood by David. And so as they come back, Israel's like, yeah, bring the king back. And Judah's like, wait a second, time out. You guys are the ones that made him flee in the first place. And Israel's going, yeah, but we're the first ones to welcome him back. You were slow on the ball. And they said, yeah, but he's part of us. He's from us. They said, yeah, but we're 10/12ths of the nation. You're only a part. So there's this bickering. Does it matter? Does it matter who was the first to welcome him back? Does it matter who has the bigger share? The answer is no. It doesn't. They're arguing and fighting over silly things that don't matter. Sound familiar? God's people arguing and bickering over things that don't matter? I'm just saying. Times haven't changed much. David comes back. Before I move on, let me just be clear. That's not pointing fingers at anybody, okay? That's just saying. It's all the same. It's still going on. David comes back only to find rebellion 2.0, basically. You get to chapter 20, and this is Sheba. Sheba's trying to lead a rebellion now against David. Little weakness is shown. Everybody wants their peace. Thinks they can be king. Sheba leads this rebellion. David sends Amasa, who is the general of his armies now. This changed under Absalom's watch, okay? Joab was David's general. When Absalom came in and kind of rose to power, he appointed Amasa over the armies. When David comes back, he says, hey, let Amasa remain as my general. How do you think Joab feels about this? That guy's got my job. Mind you, both of these cats are in the business of killing people. Okay? Trained soldiers, they fight for a living. That's what they do. And you've got two of them at odds with one another. How you think this goes? Well, it goes like this. David calls for Amasa, send my troops out, chase this guy down. Well, he doesn't come when he says he was going to come. So guess what? Joab goes, hey, David, go ahead and send me out. I'll take some guys. Our boys will clean this mess up. We'll take care of business. Well, on the way, Joab and his guys meet up with Amasa and his guys. So, Joab goes up to Amasa. He grabs him by the beard. Apparently this is a thing. He grabs him by the beard to kiss him, greet him with a kiss. Not like, we're not talking about on the lips like we're talking, but think like European, cheek sort of deal. Grabs him by the beard to go in. Meanwhile, he's got a blade. He just slits the guy's stomach open. Entrails coming out. This is the way the text describes it. I'm not trying to be gross, okay? And they leave the guy, entrails hanging out, bleeding on the side of the road. As if to say, when you cross me, this is how you end up. So, are you with me, Joab and David? Or are you with your boy that's laying dying on the side of the road? I'm just saying, you got to make a choice. And as the army comes by and as the men come by, they stop and stay with Amasa. Hold on. Maybe I miscalculated, Joab says. So they drag Amasa off, cover his body up, and so as the soldiers continue down the road, they don't stop because they don't see him. Everything's good. Opponent's out of the way. Bleeding, dying in a field. We're marching on. So they get to the town where Sheba has found refuge, and they lay siege to it, right? Cut off food supply, water supply, and they're looking to take the town so they can get in, kill Sheba. Again, listen, guys, if I'm writing a religious book and I'm putting it together, I'm probably leaving some of this stuff out. It just doesn't go well as far as people looking like they're following God, right? Slicing their enemies' stomachs open, leaving them to die on the side of the road, overthrowing the king, laying siege to the city. Here's what happens. Some lady in the city goes, hey, why are you coming up against us? Like, we're Israelites just like you are. In fact, man, we've been good to Israel over our history. Why are you coming at us like this? And he said, well, you're actually housing giving refuge to somebody who's trying to overthrow the king. And we consider this our personal business to address. And she says, hey, let us take care of it. We'll find him, and so on. So guess what happens? Town gets together. Hey, either we all perish, or we can kill this dude, and they'll be happy. So what do? Well, they kill this dude, Sheba. They cut off his head. And how do they let the soldiers outside know, hey, you can stop laying siege to our city? Well, they take the guy's severed head, and they chunk it over the wall and say, hey, there's your head. Go take that back to David. We're good. I might leave this out. So they go back to David. Hey, David, all is well. We're fine. Keep reigning. So David comes up, chapter 21. You've got the Gibeonites. Long story short, the Gibeonites were not part of Israel, but they were brought into Israel by deception. When Saul was king before David, Saul did not do right by the Gibeonites. And so the word of the Lord came to David, the beginning of chapter 21. There was a famine in the day of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the face of the Lord. Lord, why is this happening? What are you up to? Why would you allow this? In this particular instance, he says, there is blood guilt on Saul and on his house because he put the Gibeonites to death. So there's past sin that's not even their sin. It's not David's sin. It's not the Israelites' sin. It's Saul's, and he's dead and done. And it's still lingering, and it hasn't been addressed. So David goes to them, and he says, verse 3, what shall I do for you, and how shall I make atonement that you may bless the heritage of the Lord? How can we make this right, he says. David is still paying for the sins of Saul at this point. They resolve this with the Gibeonites. And then they find themselves at war again with the Philistines. The Philistines. Remember Goliath? Goliath is dead. I thought we kicked their tails and sent them running. And they're back. Why? Why are they back? Well, because the Lord said in the wake of David's sin, hey, guess what? As a result of your sin, there's going to be fighting. There's going to be war. You were at rest and now you're not. And again, this was not a punishment from the Lord because of David's sin, but it was the earthly consequences of David's sin. Because of the choices David made, it was the ripple effect on the pond. One thing led to another, led to another, led to another, and here we are. And there's fighting again. They sensed weakness in the throne. He went into exile. He came back. Hey, this is our shot. Let's go get Israel. And guess who's fighting on behalf of the Philistines? Giants that were descendants of, you guessed it, Goliath. Now, what does any of this have to do with us? Holdenville, 2023. Man, this is ancient history. But it's not. Here's the first thing that we learn from this. Sometimes sorrow darkens our view. Sorrow darkens our view. David was rightfully mourning the loss of his son, but he was mourning the loss of his son at the expense of realizing and seeing what the Lord had done and what the Lord is doing and what the Lord will do. The Lord had made a promise to David that he would be on the throne and his descendants would maintain the throne forever. This was fulfilled in Jesus, but the Lord is still working those things out in the events that are at play. The Lord is building his kingdom, which isn't just about the nation of Israel, but it is about the kingdom of God that Jesus came and announced. The kingdom of God is here. It is at hand. I have brought it, and we are building it. And if by faith in Jesus you belong to God through him, you are part of that kingdom, and that kingdom is still being built and will be built until Revelation 21 comes about and the new heavens and the new earth, and we dwell in the presence of the Lord for all eternity. The Lord is at work, and he's doing big things. But all David can see is the sorrow that he's faced with. Why? Because sorrow darkens our view. This is human. It's not that David's done something wrong. It's that he needs some people in his space and in his business to remind him when that sorrow hits, David, keep your eyes set and focused on the Lord. That's where you need to look. Not, David, don't be sad, get over it. That's not the message. But the message is a victory has been won, and if you can't see that, you need to realign your focus. Sorrow darkens our view. Guys, this is still true. Some of you are still in the midst of sorrow. And the answer is not, get over it. Time will heal it. Right? That's not helpful, right? It's very human in many instances. Feelings can also be overwhelming. Feelings are not wrong or bad or evil. But sometimes we have to remind our feelings of what is true. Not in a way that makes our feelings go away, not in a way that resolves our feelings, but in a way that where we can abide in those feelings and yet simultaneously keep the truth of God in front of us. Both are necessary. And so when Joab comes to David and he says, man, I know you're sad about Absalom, But as long as you stay here, you're going to alienate everybody that's with you because you've lost sight of how they've been affected by this whole ordeal. We've got to be together, and we've got to keep in sight what the Lord is doing and how the Lord is at work and that He has delivered us from Absalom. And yes, you have suffered a great loss. But we together need to push forward. Sorrow tends to darken our view, and when it does, we need to remind ourselves of the truth of God's Word and the hope that Jesus has delivered to us. Hope that says, even if this doesn't get resolved, I know when my breath ends here on this earth, through faith in Jesus, I know the resolution. That I enter into the eternal presence of the Lord, which is by far better than all of this here. Sorrow can darken that. Our feelings can distract us from that. The second thing is we see that sin distracts. Y'all, this is the truth of every one of our lives. Sin will distract us. That may even be an understatement. Where do we see that in the text? We see it when David, in the wake of all of this mess, has to go to the Gibeonites because there's a famine in the land, and he's got to resolve sin from the past that's still not been resolved and make some things right that have not been made right. Because some people were mistreated and their lives were sought unjustified. And even though David didn't have a hand in that, and probably most of the current Israelites at that time didn't have a hand in it, it still needed to be addressed. And it was a distraction from, I want to say it was a distraction from what mattered, but honestly, resolving that sin and the wake of it mattered. So there were some big picture things going on, but addressing that mattered as well. Had it already been addressed, David wouldn't have to pause and fix all of that. In addition, there was a mission at hand. There was a rebellion that was rising up in Sheba. Joab had some beef with Amasa. I read one commentary that says, we don't know why Joab did this. And I'm like, I know why Joab did this. Because the dude took his spot. And he was still in his spot. And he was jealous that he wasn't the general. So he felt like he needed to make things right and get Amasa out of his position and come back in. And guess what? It's the exact same thing that we saw in Absalom. David's on the throne, and David has not done right by the people of Israel, and he is not judged justly. And he has let injustice slide, and he has failed to bring justice, and he needs to be gone. And it's my job, Absalom, to make sure that he's gone. No, it's not your job, Absalom. It's the Lord's job. The Lord needs to step in and address some of those things. And we've got to trust the Lord in His timing and in His goodness that He does not scathe over injustice, that He doesn't look past it, that He doesn't minimize it, but that He will address it in His time, and it's not our job to do His job for Him. He's the Lord. In the same way, if you have kids or grandkids, this issue arises sometimes, especially when there's a dispute between siblings, and it's the parents or grandparents or even sometimes aunt and uncle's job to intervene, to bring resolution. But what happens? Many times our kids or grandkids want to play, I'll tell you how to fix this. They did this, so you should do that. Time out. I don't need your help. I just need you to let me take care of it. That's what Joab did. And the Lord would say, listen, I get Amasa took your spot. I get that you're sore about it. But guess what? I need you to let me do my job. I don't need you to go out and kill him. That's not your spot. You got another business to handle. You let me handle the other part. But Joab got distracted, and he thought he needed to take matters into his own hands and kill his opponent. And it was a distraction from what was going on. Sin distracts us, guys. And the same thing is true for you and me today. Guys, as followers of Jesus, we are given a clear mission. If you belong to Jesus and you are following him with your life, there is a clear mission for us. Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Man, we've got clear marching orders. But so many times we get distracted by things that the Lord is saying, you need to let me handle that, and you need to go take care of the business that I've given you to take care of. But God, I need this job to provide for my family. No, you need me to provide for your family. You need to be faithful and you need to go. I've called you to go. And sometimes that's overseas. But, no buts. Right? I need you to be obedient. Sin distracts us. We've got to trust the Lord to do his job. He is good, and he is great, and he is faithful. Thirdly, false kings divide. False kings divide. Was it the end of 19? Verse 43, 1943. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king and in David. Also, we have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. These guys are butting heads over things that don't matter. Why? Because Absalom, a false king, came in and many of them followed him and brought division. And guess what? Even though David comes back and is on the throne right now and ruling over Israel and Judah, you know what happens shortly after David dies? You've got the king of Israel and you've got the king of Judah. And there's division. You know where that division came from? Right here. And all of that stuff just festered and grew. That's not a word. Grew. Excuse me. You know why? Because false kings bring division. Great, we don't have any kings, right? We're good. Well, there is a king, and his name's Jesus. And guess what? There's a lot of false kings that we chase after still. Now, they're not holding a political office or sitting on a throne, but we can establish them as king over our life. And a lot of times, you'll find that king when you look in the mirror. But I like that king. I know that king. Me and that king, we're pretty tight. Guess what? That king does not have your best interest in heart. Guess what? That king doesn't see everything. Guess what? That king is easily distracted by sin. Guess what? That king is feeble and weak, not as strong as he or she thinks that they are. And when our allegiances are divided between King Jesus and especially King me, this does not turn out well. I tend to listen to me a lot easier than I can listen to Jesus. So I've got to compensate for that. I need a lot of Jesus, and I need him real loud so that he can drown out the me that's inside my head. And remind myself, you make a really bad king. in the similar way that David makes a pretty poor king in Israel. David's messed some junk up. And even the rebellion of his son against him is partly David's fault. Because why? Because he makes a bad king. And you know why the Lord said, listen, I'm going to give you a king, but it's not going to turn out well. Because he knows every one of us makes a really bad king. And guess what? There's already a really good king that's ruling and reigning. We don't need to take that place. All we need to do is realize that he is king, and he is good, and he is God, and he knows what is best for us in the same way that a lot of times parents know what is best for kids, and kids cannot see that. I was a kid once. This is not a kid you need to listen sort of speech. This is a human, we all tend to think this way sort of deal. And then at some point, we get older and we see the world a little bit broader, and we realize sometimes, not always, okay, sometimes parents are poor, like poor parents. Like that happens, okay? But sometimes we wake up and realize, I was the one that didn't know, and they were kind of spot on. Not always. With the Lord, though, it is always true. I kind of didn't know, and he was definitely spot on. Always. False kings will divide, and the same is true among God's people now. When we chase after kings that don't matter, and we make things king that aren't king in this place, you know what happens? We get this side and this side. And the two are going at each other over something that doesn't matter. Because it's a distraction from what does matter. And it's losing sight of who's king and who's on the throne. 4, outside enemies decay hope. You're going, okay, we're past Absalom. If you're in Israel, we're past Absalom. Now there's Sheba. We get past Sheba because his head gets thrown over the wall. And then there's giants. Again, we already slayed giants and got the Philistines and found rest, and now they're back. What is God doing? Why is all of this stuff coming? Why is there no break? Why is there no rest? Why are God's people still facing turmoil? Because outside enemies decay hope. It's really easy to forget when there's all of these enemies in front of us and we feel like all of these battles are ours to face and to win. It's real easy to forget it's the Lord's job. He will fight for us, and he will carry us, and he will strengthen us, and his will cannot be thwarted. Okay. I sense that you don't get it. Because that's a big deal. Okay? What the Lord says that he will do, he will do. And when he makes a promise, and that he said this thing is coming, it will come. And the thing that he will accomplish, he will accomplish. And nobody's stubbornness and nobody's sin and the suffering of the world that we live in cannot derail what the Lord is going to do. Period. Now, when we're walking through difficult situations, similar to David, that sorrow and that difficulty and that suffering can kind of hide what the Lord is doing and make us forget that he's going to accomplish his will. Right? We lose sight of the big picture in view of the small, and we forget that there is coming a day with no more sorrow and no more death and no more sickness and no more pain and all of the former things are passed away, because guess what? He makes all things new. And so, disease and death and hurt brought on by other people's sin and other people's choices that we didn't invite in, and the sorrow and the grief that we have now, guess what? The Lord doesn't want that for us. Well, then why doesn't He fix it? He is. Hold on. Well, you mean I have to die first? Listen. Our lives are this short. Preacher, it doesn't feel like that. I know. I'm with you. Trust me. I feel it too. Hold on and trust that He's bringing out the big picture of what's coming. And when all of that comes about, all of the new things, the old heaven and the old earth are passed away because they've been corrupted by sin, and the new heaven and the new earth come, I promise you want in on that. But that has to do with what you do with Jesus now. Is He Lord and Savior? Or do you make a better king? Outside enemies decay hope, and it's real easy for us to see the giants that are sitting in front of us, but to forget. And that giant's pretty big, but I serve a God who's much bigger. It's kind of like David said, who does this giant think that he is to defy the armies of the living God? When he was a boy, he remembered and knew. Man, sometimes life can help us to forget. To forget that God's kingdom cannot be deterred. Period. So Revelation 21 is coming. The new heaven and the new earth are coming. The passing away of pain and death and suffering and sin and sorrow and difficulty is coming. Hold on. I get that it feels a long way off. But it's like being almost 38. I know. Still young, I get it. But I tell you what, man, 14 years ago, 14 years old, seems like a distant past. And yet I'm like, where has that time gone? And it happened like that. And some of you are sitting there and you're going, yeah, 74 right here. Like 38, man, seems like a couple weeks ago. But I wake up and I'm 74. And then others of you are going, man, 74 was yesterday, and 16 years later, here I am at 90. And I don't know how much more time I have, but it feels like it's pretty short. And we're like, 90's forever in front of us. Because life is actually pretty short. Fair? Sometimes it drags. Sometimes it sprints. In the grand scheme of things, we're talking about 4000 BC. That's forever ago. That's 6,000 years. And you know what? Eternity? 6,000 years is a moment. Hold on. Hang in there. The Lord knows, and the Lord sees you and your situation. The Lord hears your difficulty. His answer is not, you're going to have to grow up and get over it. His answer is, wait. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't lose sight of you. I know what's coming. I prepared the way. I'm here to walk with you. I'm here to carry you. Would you just trust me? Trust that what I have for you is better than what you want for yourself. Trust that the fix that you think that you need is the fix that will only cause you to need fix after fix after fix after fix after that. I know what you need. And first and foremost, I provided it in Jesus. Would you trust me? Would you trust that I'm going to fix all of this? Would you trust that even though you don't feel like it, I'm good and I'm for you? Would you trust me?